This is the course overview video, or as I like to call it, the What Are We Going to Learn Today video. This video is going to list out what we're going to go over the next few hours as you go through this course. Now, as I've mentioned, this course is the ICDN exam prep course, so it follows the track for the CCENT exam. If you were to go buy one of the Cisco Press books for the CCENT exam, the ICDN exam, you would find that we cover all of the topics in the book. Now, some we cover more in depth than they do in the book. Some we don't really go into as much depth as they do in the book, because honestly, a lot of the exam prep books I've seen for this level of certification, a lot of them will start out very basic. This is a computer. This is a network. This is how they work together. This course, we're kind of crunched for time, so we assume that there are certain prerequisites that you already know before you take this course. Basic computer knowledge. You know what a computer is, you know what a mouse is, you know what a network cable is, you know how basic networking works and basic computing works. And above all, you have to have a desire to learn, because that's one thing that will serve you well in your career, whether you do networking or voice or whatever you do. If you're dealing with computing technology, you have to be willing to learn and willing to adapt throughout your entire career. That being said, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what we're actually going to cover. We'll start off with the network building blocks. We'll talk about the basic terminology of the network building blocks. We'll talk about the OSI model and all of its 7 layers and how it works together to make a beautiful 7-layer network cake, as it were. We'll cover the basics of Ethernet. We'll look at the frames and determine how the frames know how to get from one workstation to another and what it does once it gets there. And then we'll talk about switching, the building block of the LAN. And basically how switches work, how they get the data from point A to point B, and then we'll move on to TCP/IP networking. We'll talk about IP address basics, what an IP address is, what each of the octets of the IP address means, the different classes of IP addresses. We'll talk about how switches and IP work together, or basically the layer 2 and 3 interaction that the address resolution protocol provides. We'll talk about some fundamental network services that you pretty much have to make any network work properly, DNS and DHCP being those fundamental network services. We'll talk about how they work, how they keep your network running in tip-top shape, and how your life would be ever so empty without them. We'll then move on to network security. Now, this being a very entry-level course, we don't talk a whole lot about network security because that's just not what's covered in the exam. However, we do have to mention it because it is on the exam and because every good network engineer has to take network security as their responsibility. As I'll mention in the course, there are large corporations that do nothing but security, and any large organization may have their own dedicated internal security team. But you as a network engineer have to be security conscious, and so we'll cover the very basics of network security in this course. We'll then move on to switch configuration. We covered the basics of switching a little earlier. In this case, we're actually going to console into a switch and we're going to configure the basic configuration options on the switch. We'll talk about switch and port security, how you can secure ports from being used without your knowledge, how you can secure the switch so that only authorized people can get into the switch and do anything they need to do on the switch. Then we'll move on and talk about wireless LANs. Now again, this being an entry-level CCENT course, we don't talk a whole lot about wireless networks, but we do talk about the basics and about the various standards, and how a wireless LAN can interact and help or hinder your wired LAN, and some of the things that people may not take into consideration when they're putting a wireless network together. We'll pause this course overview here. We'll pick it up in the next video so we're not too crunched for time.